Don't do that. Oh, that's Bill's.
Yeah.
Oh, I lost my clock. Are you recording yet? Tilo, recording?
We are recording and we are live on YouTube.
Okay. It's 3:00 in the afternoon on Galveston Island. Welcome to everybody in the world. Some of you guys are 5 o'clock in the morning and some of you are 10 or 11 o'clock at night. I really appreciate you joining us. Today we have a presentation from Joel Potter. Joel Potter is a professional yacht broker, has been for many, many years. I first met Joel in 1876, and that's a photograph I took of him right there on the left of the screen in 1876. And he was 19 years old and just begun selling boats for Amel. I think that's an Amel behind you in the photograph, isn't it, Joel?
I think it was 1876.
Yeah, 1876. I was wondering if anybody got that. Nobody laughed. Anyway,
that was probably in about that picture was taken in, I think, 1982. That was the second year of selling Amel boats. I sold my first Amel boat 40 years ago in the month of April in 1981.
Wow. Wow. And of course, that's Joel's lovely wife in the photograph on the right-hand side of the screen, Vela, and you'll see more of her a little bit later. This is Joel's contact information. Joel is a member of our group and a participating member of our group. When people have questions and only Joel knows the answer, he jumps in with always a very, very complete answer. I don't know this for sure, but I think that Joel has sold more Amels than maybe anybody, because he not only sold Amels new in North America, but he specialized in the resale of Amels. And the other day I was talking to Joel, and I think he told me that there's one Amel hull number that he sold, I think 6 times. He'll probably talk about that. So Amel is part of Joel's DNA. If you were to draw Joel's blood, you're going to find a little bit of orange stripe, a little bit of red stripe, and a little bit of sand stripe in his blood. He knows Amels. And Joel is one of very few brokers in the world that I recommend. So without going any further and taking any more of Joel's time, I'd like to introduce Joel Potter, an American in Florida, a broker specializing in resale Amels today, and a guy that has probably sold more Amels than anybody else. And he brings to you some tips of whether you're selling or buying an Amel. Joel, it's all yours.
Get to presentation mode, I think.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, I need to what, push it up?
Just touch it.
Bill,
Okay, there we go.
let me say also some words about Joel, because
Here we
it's
go.
the reason that I bought an Amel boat.
Pardon?
The first boat was an Amel that I bought from in France.
Mm-hmm.
But I bought the boat because of Joel, because he was making very nice advertisements in.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Those are the days when people read magazines and you had to have
Exactly.
big. I would spend about $5,000 every month with Full Page and Cruising World and the other magazines, and then the internet came, and that all just. But hey, great that everybody's here. Thank you for tuning in. I'm really honored to be with you and to share some of the stuff I've learned in the 40 years of selling Amel boats, which is it's a great way to wake up every morning and think you have some Amels out there that just need to be sold. So I want to thank you a lot. And I also wanted to mention the lady in the picture. That's my wife, Vila. She's my business partner as well as my partner in everything else that I do. And a lot of people out there are probably going to snicker when I say this, but most people put up with me so they can hang around with Vila. So she's a big part of the business, and she's a real big asset to us. So just going to check out. Okay. How I got started with Amel very quickly was I sold my first one in 1981, and I sent them a telex. Remember telex machines? And I said, you know, I love cruising sailboats and I love your boat. And they sent me back a 1-sentence answer. They said, we don't like yacht brokers. And I thought, well, these guys are pretty sharp, you know? So anyway, I kept pursuing it. And finally, after a while, they recognized that I really liked cruising boats and sold a lot of them. But they noticed that I was technical, that I liked technical things as much as the actual selling. And so that's how the relationship was born, because I could do liaison with them. You know, if we had a customer over here that had a problem, I could go look at it and either fix it or tell them, you know, go back to Amel and back and forth. So that's basically what got my toe in the door. So I'm going to go ahead and get rolling. I'm going to kind of skim lightly on a lot of the stuff. If there's anything that you'd like me to expound on later in the question and answer period, I can bore you to tears about any possible thing that you might want to know about selling an Amel boat, but I'll try not to do that as we roll along. So without any further ado. Okay, selling an Amel. First of all, you have to understand that Amel clients are different than any clients that I've ever dealt with before. And I've had experience selling lots of other types of boats. I used to build the Peterson 44 with Jack Kelly in Taiwan years ago. And used to sell production boats, and I had a stint with Trentella for a while. But Amel people are very detail oriented. They want to know the facts and the figures. They want to know all the details about construction. They want to know everything about everything on the boat, where most other people that are buying boats are just, I guess they're not as intense as most Amel buyers are. And most Amel sellers, can you remember the moment when you got it? When you went on an Amel boat and all of a sudden it just resonated with you, or you understood, wow, this is really something special. We used to call that the Amel virus. We're probably gonna have to come up with a new word for it, but once that happened to somebody, there was usually no other way to get rid of it other than to buy an Amel boat. And that's basically, I see it happen in the hundreds of boats that I've sold. The people get on the boat and all of a sudden they just get it. They understand why this is like this and that is like that. And the whole idea of making a real cruising boat to keep you safe and comfortable and happy, you know, as you make your way wherever you want to go in your boat. But when you get started, you know, when you're selling your Amel, before you meet with a broker, write down your expectations, requirements, your questions and stuff like that. I find it's always better to work off of checklists so that you make certain that you get everything done. And determining who would be the best broker to sell your boat, that's, are we there?
You're fucking around. I'm trying to get comfortable.
Anyway, I don't want to make this about me, you know, and say, oh, blah, 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 I'm a great Amel broker. I am, and I do a good job, but, you know, there's a lot of other people in the world that do it too. And it just depends on where you're located and a bunch of other things. That said, I've sold Amels all over the world. And the most important thing my clients ask me is, have you been on the boat? Have you seen the boat? And that's a big requirement. So in terms of that, you know, that's going to, who's the best guy for you? That's going to basically depend on where you are, who you get along with, and a whole bunch of other factors that I really probably won't touch base here, but you need to make sure any broker you deal with is licensed and bonded, and they have a regulated trust escrow account. In other words, the account that your money will be flowing in and out of, that's completely and absolutely separate from the broker's operating account. You don't want those funds to ever commingle. It's against the law in most states here in the United States, but it's a real important thing. And if you ask them that question, they don't give you a straight answer, that would send up red flags with me right off the bat. When you get started, basically the way I do it is I spend about a day on any boat that I'm offered to sell. And I've been on over 300 surveys on boats that I've sold. And so I've got the process down pretty good in terms of what they look for. And so I basically pre-survey the boat and go through and look for known problem areas and places where sometimes we have difficulties with Amel. And I take a borescope with me and I look around corners and underneath floorboards where you can't see, and just get a really good idea of what we've got. And nobody can tell you what your Amel boat is worth unless they really look at it. When I mean really look at it, really get in the corners and get into the engine room and get underneath stuff and really get a thorough investigation. And that's also going to start to help me to form an opinion about the recommendations that I need to make in terms of what we need to do to prepare the boat for putting it on the market, to make a list up of the things that are beneficial to do and things that are not really worth the money because they're not going to add a lot of value. Regarding the timing of the sale and the location of the boat, people buy Amels pretty much as a reward for a life well led. It's when the kids get out of college, the dog dies, the house sells, the business sells. There's always something in front of that process that makes them get to that point. And when they get there, they basically, whatever amount of money they have accumulated to buy the boat, that's when they buy it. And it's typically not seasonal. The slowest times to sell Amel boats are in the United States. It's after American Thanksgiving and until about the 15th of January. It's the holiday season, and then everybody wakes up January 1st and realize they got to pay taxes, and that sobers them up a little bit. And that kind of wears off around the 15th. But other than that, there's no real time because it's not seasonally done. It's done when they have the wherewithal and the position so that they can go ahead and get their boat. As far as location goes, having your boat close to a known yachting center is always the best way to do it. But if you can't do that, it's always nice to have it positioned someplace that is a nice place to travel to. It's snowing up in Chicago, and you ask your wife, say, honey, how would you like to go to Fort Lauderdale and look at some boats and maybe play a round of golf or do this? Or you could say, how would you like to go to Brunswick, Georgia, where you can't even get a hamburger? You got to position the boat someplace where it's nice to get to. But if you can't, if you decide you need to sell the boat and you're down in the Caribbean, out in the Pacific, it can make things a little bit more complex because most Americans are a little bit more hesitant to travel than our European buddies because they're just not as used to crossing borders as quickly as people do in Europe. And they like to buy stuff oftentimes a little bit more close to home because they feel that they can, get used to the boat while they're still in waters they're familiar with and where they, speak the same language as the guys in the shipyard and stuff like that. But again, the location isn't as important as having a nice boat that's well prepared and priced correctly. And when you prepare the boat for marketing, your broker will make up a list of important things that are, almost essential. And the next thing, you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. When I walk people up to an Amel, I can tell in 10 minutes whether I'm wasting my time or not. Seriously, it doesn't take much longer than that. They go from being curious to starting to make an emotional connection with the boat. And that's what you want them to do. You want them to think, I could own this. I could be out using it. I could be out enjoying it. And the first impressions are really, really so critical. You don't want to have, old ratty fenders and dock lines that are frayed and it's going to make people think, well, how do you take care of the rest of the stuff? So you want to really, as people walk up to the boat, you want to have everything just ship-shape, shiny, clean, and pretty much ready to go, and on the inside of the boat, you just want everything to be uncluttered. And if you can, remove everything from the boat that is not included in the sale. That's a real important thing because people say, well, what does a boat come with? I said, what you see. They say, everything? I said, everything. And I usually have a very detailed listing, which goes into all that stuff, but I don't, describe galley equipment and hand tools and things like that. But it's basically, it's good to present your boat as you're going to turn it over to the next owner, that way if you can. Some people, you can't do that because you have to live on the boat until, the boat sells and then you make a move to shore or wherever, whatever the next chapter in your life is going to be. So I can't overemphasize that. It's really important to have the boat really set up according to what the broker tells you need to be done. And it'll pay for itself very quickly because it'll make the boat sell a lot faster. The basic types of listing An open listing is basically an agreement you have with the broker that if he brings a client that'll pay what you're willing to accept, you will pay him a commission. You don't have any obligation to him outside of that. A multiple listing, also called a central agency, that's where one broker becomes your agent to the market and he presents the information on your boat in a multiple listing service, primarily Yacht World, where other brokers can get in and see it. And he acts as the agent for the sale of the boat. He will assist other brokers oftentimes in showings of the boat and things like that. And it's used by, I would say, the majority of brokers that sell all kinds of boats. They're not specializing in a specific type of boat. An exclusive listing is when you give one broker the right to sell your boat, and he represents it to everybody through Yacht World, through other things that gets the information out. People can expect a lot more from a yacht broker when you give him an exclusive listing, because he's pretty much assured, if he does his job correctly and your boat's in good shape, that he is going to make a sale on it. So he can afford to spend a lot more time, getting to know the boat, getting it ready for the market, and a whole bunch of other things, that are involved in that. But basically, that's something to discuss with the broker when you're, before you list the thing, in terms of what he will do, what he offers, and to make sure you understand that and that you're comfortable with it. There's not a lot of do's and don'ts, but there's a couple. One of the most important things, and sellers don't like to hear this, but I have to tell you, you don't want the seller anywhere near the boat when you show the boat to the client for the first time. You really don't. You don't want those guys to start talking to each other. You want to be able to take the client buyer, put them on the boat, and spend about 2 hours. It takes me 2 hours to show an Amel the first time, because I dig into lockers, I lift up floorboards, I show them how watertight bulkheads work, as other people will do too, but you don't want to be a distraction. And I've had a couple of deals killed where a potential buyer will say something that the potential seller doesn't particularly like he'll have an opinion about his anchor or whatever, and people get chips on their shoulder. So you want to have that separation between having the seller on board. Pay attention to all the small details. Make sure that everything is clean. Your engine room is spotless. Clean the underside of the oil pan, clean the drip tray under the onan. It's just, the cleaner it is, the better it looks, the easier it is to get a deal put together. And then when you do get a deal put together, don't forget to clean the bottom and the propeller the day before you take the boat out, particularly if it's been sitting for a month and a half. Ask me how I know this. And then turn on everything a couple days before and run everything, just make sure that it's going to operate, well for the sea trial. You try to avoid having problems when you go out for the test sail, and just a little bit of preparation in the beginning will help you along those lines. I'm going to flip to my next page here, and I'm going to go over here and scroll down. Oh, by the way, all the pictures that are in here presented today were taken by a guy named Billy Black. Billy Black, in my opinion, is the best marine sailing photographer in the world. He's a 3-time cancer survivor. He's one of my very best friends, and people that know us both often describe Billy as the opposite of Joel. So anyway, all the pictures were taken by Billy, and that was one when we were bringing my Amel 54 up from Martinique. I've owned 3 new Amels, and I've never sailed one of them across the Atlantic. Can you believe that? I was always too busy, and I always had to put them on a freighter and ship them over. I guess I better buy another one. Okay, now here's some of the ideas for the buyer. Again, a list is really appropriate to put down specific things you want to understand, specific things you want to understand about equipment, all those types of things. Again, lists make you not forget stuff that can be important. And it's so important. Knowledge is power. And the more you know about Amel boats before you start to shop, the better equipped you're going to be able to make a determination if this is a boat you should pursue, or if it's, if you need to wait for the next one. But, really good basis of knowledge from reliable sources. There's a lot of good reliable sources out there. There's some that aren't, and you have to pretty much use gut judgment in terms of is this really right? Because until you've owned an Amel and really gotten familiar with it, you're really just not going to know. But there's all kinds I send customers, magazine articles and things that were accurate, presentations and test sales and stuff like that of the boat that really represented the boat for really what it was rather than what necessarily somebody might want it to be. But the more knowledge that you can acquire before you get into the actual shopping process, it generally suits you better. And most brokers will be able to help you with that. They'll have information on hand that they can share with you. Again, it takes at least 2 hours for the initial inspection of any prospective Amel boat you're going to buy. I've had it take considerably longer than that, but it's basically takes a bit of time so people can see the way systems, kind of complement each other and all the ways that the things that are very special to Amel, like the watertight bulkheads and the plumbing path that takes any water that gets into the boat, into the sump in the engine rooms, things like that. It really, they want to put that virus into their head pretty deeply. The next part is pretty difficult because creating a strategic offer, the offer should always be strategic. And that's why it's good. The closer you are to the guy who actually listed the boat, the better you're going to be able to figure out what it's going to take, to be able to put something together that's going to be acceptable to the seller and, still within your budget. But having a strategy going in and being realistic in terms of what you're going to get the boat for. I've had several people over the years say, I'm not going to buy an ML unless I get a steal on it. And I said, well, you're not going to buy an ML. And because they typically, we don't have very many of them right now, and good ones are getting harder and harder and harder to get. My typical listings last on the market, for about a month, and they're just gone. So you're not going to steal an ML unless it needs a lot of work. And then you got to be real careful on that, because when you're refitting a boat, I found it oftentimes costs considerably more, sometimes as much as 30, 40% more than you think it will by the time you get done and by the time when you open things up to find other gremlins that are in there. But it's basic to have a good idea of what the market will bear, what the prices that have been brought in the past. And again, any good broker should be able to go on Yacht World and get that information for you. Again, the key for the broker is that the broker has real good Amel product knowledge and experience with the boats on a practical basis. In other words, he can make representations based in reality rather than, not really being fully familiar. And this next thing is very important. There's a purchase agreement you'll sign into, which typically describes who you are, who the seller is, what the boat is, where it is, how much you're going to pay for it, what's the offer subject to, and it's usually sea trial and survey, and when you're going to close on it. The important date in there is a date called the acceptance or rejection of the offer of the vessel. I'm sorry, it's the acceptance of the vessel. It's very important because once you accept the vessel, your deposit is encumbered. In other words, if you change your mind after that point, your deposit, and it's typically 10% of the purchase price, typically, it's gone. I've only had that happen to one of my customers once, and it just was an unexplainable circumstance that made him walk away from $40,000, which that was kind of a heartbreak. But in any case, the other important thing is have a checklist for the sea trial and survey. I've seen so many times that people, when they go out on a sea trial on this boat they hope to buy, they use it as a kind of like a party atmosphere to go out and celebrate the fact that soon they're going to own a new boat. Don't do that. This is a very important time, to make sure you check the boat out thoroughly, completely, really dig into it. If you have any, make sure the surveyor that you picked, has a lot of Amel experience. I can't overemphasize that. They have to have Amel, Olivier Butte is the best Amel surveyor in the world, period. End of story. I know Olivier very well. I've spent a lot of time with him, and he's just the best. But sometimes you can't get him, and sometimes he doesn't want to travel to certain places unless he can line up 2 or 3 surveys, and I can understand that. But make sure that the surveyor you do get, and ask him, have you surveyed an Amel before? And he says, I've done a bunch of them. Say, can I see copies of those surveys? And see if they're thorough, see if he really has a lot of Amel experience. And most surveyors want to do a good job. They're not, they're not trying to screw anybody or play around with anything, but the more experience that they have, it's the better off everybody's going to be. So I'm going to flip to the next page. And here we go. The final phase of the purchase. This is, once you've pretty much sea trialed and surveyed the boat, and you've agreed on price, agreed on principle. There's usually something that comes up during the survey that nobody expected, even by doing a real in-depth pre-survey, there's generally something that'll come up or something will break during a survey. And this is when you have to be realistic to keep the deal together. For instance, let's say you go out in the sea trial and all of a sudden you discover that the engine is failing. It was only able to push the boat at like 6.5 knots when it should have pushed it, to 7 to 8.5 with a clean bottom and everything else. They do a compression test and the engine's down on compression. The seller isn't going to give you a new engine. And here's why. Most boats, the Super Marimus, if they were built today, they would cost about $1,200,000. If you just look at what the 50s are selling for and just also projecting from what they sold for way back when. You're typically buying that boat for $250,000, $300,000, $310,000, somewhere in that range. And if the boat's been depreciated, the replacements and things like that will typically be depreciated as well. And it's even worse for things like electronics and other things like that. You've got to be careful about what you anticipate, because if the rigging's over 15 years old, your insurance company, more than likely, the insurance company will insist that you replace it before doing any type of offshore passage making. And that's a really good idea, because swedge end fitting, rigging fittings don't usually show that they're going to fail until right about the time when they do. Before you sign the acceptance of vessel form, make sure that you're comfortable with every detail, because once that's signed, people can become a lot less cooperative or a lot less congenial even, so you make certain that, when the deal isn't done until you're satisfied. The deal isn't done until you really, the seller is happy that the buyer's going to do what he needs to do. The buyer's happy that the boat is exactly what he wants. That's a real important time to have clarity on that. You're going to need a documentation agent who will help you to change the boat, to change whatever flag it's in into the flag that you want. And there's people that do that on a professional basis. The thing to remember, there's no title insurance in yachting. It's not like buying a piece of real property. So basically you need to have a really good documentation agent that doesn't leave any doors open or doesn't not cross the T's and dot the I's where they need to be done, so that when you own the boat, they can give you the assurance that you actually own it and that there's not going to be anybody that's going to be able to come up and lay claim to anything regarding your boat, which can wreck your day, that's for sure. Insurance underwriters. This is something I probably shouldn't talk about because it's not a good thing for brokers to say, but it's getting harder to get insurance. So you need to investigate this beforehand. I've always been able to get people insurance, but sometimes they have to get somebody like Bill Rouse to sign them off, that they know the boat, know the systems, and because, I've sold Amel boats to people that have never owned a boat before. I sold 3 of them last year to people that had never owned any boat of any consequence before. Not that they didn't have some experience, they chartered and things like that, but they all had, the insurance companies made them get right off. And once you get a survey, there's going to be recommendations on that survey, and there's going to be some that need to be contended with and some that don't. And that surveyor will let you know, and your insurance company will let you know. Don't mess around with that. Really, they're not cutting anybody any slack these days. If you have recommendations, make certain that you get the ones taken care of immediately within the time frame. Because if something happens and they're not gonna settle with you. It just it's something really important, and people sometimes don't pay enough attention to that. Okay, the list of do's and don'ts. After you buy your boat, put your checkbook away. Seriously, hide it, and change all the fluids in the engine, the generator, transmission, stuff like that. Bring all the safety gear up, fire extinguisher stuff up to standards. And any maintenance, any needed maintenance, take care of that, but don't go out and start refitting the boat and start changing things. And I found so many people I've sold an Amel to, the first month they said, I don't like this galley. They'd go and they'd rip the galley up and change it around and stuff like that. And that 8 months later, they'd call me up. How much will it cost to put the galley back the way it was? I said, probably about 3 times as much as it cost you to make it the way it is, And not that people are going to do their galleys, things like that, but really even replacing anything on the boat, it's best to get some experience with the boat and to make a decision based on experience rather than what you think might happen in the future. And it just gives you a lot more of a good understanding about the way everything on the boat kind of works with each other, and you'll make better decisions if you wait a little bit. And it's hard to do that, but it's really worthwhile. And what else do we have on that? Okay. that's pretty much, that's the most important thing, once you're in the final phase of the purchase, is to make sure you're getting what you think you are, and then go and play with the boat, hug and kiss it a little bit before you get real serious about doing anything else on it. And Bill wanted me to take this off, but this is the truth. Bill's not my uncle. He didn't give me $10 before this started, but the best money you will ever spend on Amel is to take his course and to have his book. And the most confidence inspiring thing I have is when I go on a boat and they have Bill's book over by the nav station and I open it up and the pages are greasy. That means they've read it and they've done things, because I'm very, very technical, and Bill's book is really extraordinary, and it'll be a big help for you, because you won't wonder how to do things. It'll be right there in abundant photography. It'll tell you the whole story, basically, of what you need to know about taking good care of your Amel, so that it'll take good care of you. And I guess with that, I'm happy to open up to questions or anything else. Let's see. Oh, 2 more pictures. That was Billy Black hanging out of a helicopter over my Amel 54 for a brochure photo. And this is, next one is another one where he's out of a helicopter in the 54. This is my favorite Amel picture. That's Vila driving our boat. And if you look real close, you can see that I'm reaching around, grabbing for my wallet, so that seems like yachting and spending massive amounts of money kind of go hand in glove. But that picture was taken off the coast of Fort Lauderdale, again, hanging from a helicopter. And those are all the pictures that I've got to share with you guys today. So
Okay.
You're gonna, Tilo, you do it.
So I've got a few questions that people have forwarded to me. One was one question. Actually, Jonathan had 2 questions.
Yeah, those are good questions too. I got those, Tilo. Those.
Okay.
That's very good question. A gentleman named Jonathan said he wouldn't be able to attend, and he just wondered if he could get this question answer. And the first one is, you know what? I didn't get that part of his note. Tell me what the questions are. I know the ones about
first
VAT.
Question. Yeah, the first question is, when Amel handed over the new boat to the first owner, what operation manuals, maintenance manuals, and parts catalogs, if any, were part of the ship's library?
Very good. That got more elaborate over the years, from the days of the Sharkey Maramoo Mango, where basically they would put, like a 3-page. It usually was on orange paper too. I never understood that, but they would put a 3-page things, basically, don't do this because it's bad, and then also all the manuals and stuff like that. Typically from about, I think, the early 80s on, they would put all the manuals for all the outside supplier equipment, generators, winches, hatches, electronics. They would put them in binders. Amel's always been real good at that, because normally when you get a new boat, you've got about 80 manuals that are stuffed into the navigation station, and there's no rhyme or reason to them, where Amel organizes them. And then right after, and maybe I'll check with Olivier, I think right after the Super Maramoo started, they made it a requirement to have a comprehensive owner's manual with instructions on board the boat to be part of the certification, to get the CE certification on the boat to go offshore in it. And that also has evolved over the years. But I've sold an awful lot of different kinds of boats and worked for different manufacturers over the year. Nobody does a good a job as Amel does, and they do it to today. Just about anything that operates on your boat that needs maintenance will have a manual, and it's really intensive, and it's really worthwhile. Wiring diagrams, things like that. They don't have too many parts lists of stuff, except in some of the generator stuff. They'll give you certain replacement parts and things like that, but you need to call the manufacturer on that, because a lot of times those parts evolve and they have a better replacement part. Did he have another question too?
Yes, he did. And he was asking about how does the VAT status affect the selling price of a secondhand boat? It seems a boat with EU VAT paid status is usually asking a higher price. However, if the buyer has nothing to do with the EU, it seems that EU VAT is not relevant or required. How would the buyer, seller, and broker handle this?
Well, this, on any tax advice, and I'm going to give a little bit more, I skipped on sales tax and stuff, and I'll go back to that, and on duty, on paying duty on boats in certain countries. But as far as that goes, you need to examine that with the latest rules because that has changed quite a bit since it evolved. But basically, somebody in Europe buys the boat, they either have to go through a complicated procedure where they lease it back from another company and they don't pay the VAT on the boat, or they have to pay. And VAT, as you know, Tilo, it varies between, I think, like 15% to like 24%, depending on exactly where you are in Europe. And it's a requirement. You have to pay it. So if you're an American and you're going to Europe to buy a boat that VAT's been paid on, you can't expect them to take that off the price because that's going to be valuable to a European and it's already been paid. So in other words, if a European buys a boat where VAT's been paid, he doesn't have to repay that. That's an incredible amount of money. And that's why a lot of people like to buy 1 and 2 year old European boats, you know, when the VAT's been paid, because it's like pennies from heaven. It's just it's a real big benefit, but it's not worthwhile for a European guy to take that VAT because it adds value to what the boat is. And a European that's going to come along and buy it, it's going to add value to him, or to an American. He's right. Boats in Europe typically sell for about 15% more, you know, straight across the board, given boat, same condition, as opposed to ones that might sell outside of the European Union.
Okay, great. So I'm going to just in relation to that, Hans Pietet asked, are you aware of that the Dutch do not have an official registration for boats of less than 20 meters or less than 20 knots? How does the registration go that in countries that do have a registration?
My friends, this is a really big problem. I'm going to set the stage for what we have in the United States and then tell people how it's different elsewhere, because it is vastly different. In the United States, we have United States Coast Guard documentation. And what the document is, it tells everything from when the boat was built, what company built it, and every owner that's owned the boat from that point on. And it's the only place you can attach liens, encumbrances, any, like if somebody gets divorced and didn't pay their, you know, you can attach to, and that has to be cleared. And the only place you can clear it is with the Coast Guard. And it's on a special document that the Coast Guard issues that tells you that everything's free and clear. And I always get that the day before we close. And we typically have the documentation agent call on it the day we close, just to make sure that nobody that was standing in line snuck in at the last minute, because I've seen it happen. Lots of different countries in Europe have commercial standards, and if a boat's over a certain size, it gets a commercial document. But most of the yacht club documents, which don't have much of anything to do with the government, and some of the smaller governmental documents, they don't give you much security in terms of no liens or encumbrances being on the boat, because there's nowhere to register them. In other words, there's no place for somebody who has a claim against the boat to come and say, this guy owes me money, or they didn't pay the yard bill, or whatever that happenstance happens to be, and be able to attach a lien or an encumbrance on the boat that has to be satisfied before it changes. This is when you really have to have a really good marine documentation agent. And I believe that there's some in Europe, I'm not sure about this, it was a couple of years ago, that will offer an insurance program that if they sell you a boat and later determine that it wasn't as free and clear as they thought it was, that an insurance policy will pay the difference. But it's not inexpensive. It really isn't. So this is something that you have to be really clear about. I think most AMELs are big enough to where they can get a registry where there will be, you know, a governmental agency involved that will be able to tell you, you know, that you're actually buying what you think you're getting. So that's a good question. That's something to be aware of.
Okay. And then Eric had a question related to that, and you know, what documentation should the broker be expected to do, and why is it necessary to have a documentation agent as a separate party?
Because that's the best way to do it. Brokers sell boats. Documentation agents are familiar with the laws, the rules, the way they change, the way they, and you know, as good as I try to do my job and as good as I know other brokers do, I wouldn't want any broker doing my documentation. I would rather have it be done by a professional. Now, a lot of people say, do I need to have an attorney? Or do I need to have a CPA? Usually not, because the documentation agents do it so well. What's the document the Coast Guard gives? No, what's the piece of paper they give you that says that all the liens and encumbrances? What's that called? having a mental block right now, but the Coast Guard actually issues a piece of paper that says, as of this time, the boat is free and clear. The only exception to that, and everybody needs to know this too, there's no reserve clause for taxes. So if it's determined that somebody didn't pay their federal income tax for a couple of years, why he owned that boat, it doesn't happen very often, but the federal government, the United States, can come after you after you've purchased the boat and make you sell it. I haven't heard of that happening for several years, but back in the 90s, it happened. Never to one of my customers, but it's just one of those arcane, silly laws that the government, can prevail over everything else and get their money and get paid first. But you don't want a broker doing this because it's a very specialized type of thing. Now, a broker, he can get you a Coast Guard bill of sale or any kind of bill of sale you might need for the country you're dealing in, and he can do a lot of stuff. But he doesn't have access to a lot of things. It's not just it's not a broker shirking his duty. It's handing it off to like you go to your doctor and your doctor says you need surgery. You don't want the doctor necessarily to do the surgery. You want somebody who specializes in the surgery. Same thing with documentation. The people that I've had in my entire 44-year-old career, I've had 3 documentation agents because I was lucky enough that I got steered in the right direction by guys that were senior to me and got good people. And basically when they retired out, that's when I switched to the next one, but having a real good one. And I have a real good one. And most brokers that sell quality boats and make a good living have to have a good documentation agent because they wouldn't stay in business real long if they sent people to the wrong guys. But use a documentation agent. And maybe I'll just quickly touch on something that I didn't read my notes carefully enough. When you buy your Amel as an American buyer or even as a European buyer and you bring it to the United States and you want to sell the boat in the United States, you have to pay U.S. customs duty on the boat. And if anybody wants to send me an email, I'll break it out for you. But it basically on like a boat of $250,000, the total cost, the duties is about 1.5%, but you have to do a bunch of other things. You have to post a bond. The bond is just a guarantee to Coast Guard that you weren't lying to them about what the value was. So if it's determined later that you didn't give them the correct value, they can use the bond to get the money that they're owed. It's not, when I think of a bond, I think of getting something back. This is $500. It basically goes poof. You usually have to have a survey, although they're changing that now that you can get somebody who is familiar with the boat to give an evaluation on it. And then they go on the internet and see, I don't like to do that. I will, but I don't like to do that because if I'm selling the boat and I'm also telling the government what it's worth, it's a precarious position to be in, because if I tell them it's worth $250,000 and I sell it for $270,000, I just wouldn't want them to come knocking on my door one evening. But I do it, when everything's pretty clear, in terms of, yeah, I can see this boat is going to sell for this amount of money because it's in this kind of shape. But that's a requirement that when you're offering the boat for sale in U.S. waters, you have to pay the U.S. Customs duty before you offer it. Because if they catch you, you don't want to do that. They take your boat away from you, they'll impound it for a year, and you're not allowed to touch it or go anywhere near it, and they'll litigate it, and then you'll get it back, and you won't want it. So that's an added expense to be concerned with. But if you sell it offshore, if you sell it down in the Caribbean, different types of things, you can avoid the duty. But sooner or later, if you're going to have the boat in the United States, sooner or later, you're probably going to have to pay it if you're an American citizen.
Okay. One of the questions, we sort of got a question about, is it wise to have a single broker handling the buyer and the seller, or is it better to have your own buyer's broker?
That's a matter of personal preference. A lot of people get into something called a buyer's broker, where you just basically represent the buyer. And basically, this is my opinion on it. And this opinion won't work for everybody, but it's the way I've done business since the beginning. 95, maybe 96% of all the boats I sell, I represent both the buyer and the seller. And why is that good? It allows me to spend more time with the boat, doing that, day-long pre-inspection rather than just walking through it for half an hour, to really dig into the boat. So know what's going to happen on the sea trial survey, and know basically what the real value of the boat is pending making some changes to it and things like that. And people say, well, how can you represent both buyer and the seller? Just tell the truth. Just don't make anything up, tell the truth. And when you are close to the client seller and you know what his mood is and his attitude is, and you're close to the client buyer, you know what his attitude is and where he wants to go. Again, knowledge is power. When you have that, you can generally bring everybody together where nobody feels taken advantage of and everybody feels that they were treated well. There's probably some people that are watching today that I've sold their boats that would be happy to. The only thing I can say is I wouldn't be able to do this for 40 years if I didn't do it well. But if you want to do it the other way around, the buyer's broker, when you have a broker, he's supposed to just represent you, and it can get a little tenuous at times because the selling broker oftentimes doesn't want to give you correct information because he doesn't want you to sell his listing. He wants to sell it himself and get all the commission rather than just getting part of the commission. I've seen that happen. I've also seen it happen to where the brokers that are not familiar, and since I mainly just sell Amels, they're not familiar with Amel boats, the representations they make aren't very good. And when you get over there and you spend, thousands of dollars to fly to Europe, stay in hotels, I go down and look at the boat, and the boat's nothing like what it was represented to be. And it's not because the person was devious necessarily. It's just because they don't know any better. They don't know where to look. They don't know, the way it's supposed to be. They can't tell if something's been modified, to an extent where it really, screws the boat up rather than makes it better. I think it's a matter of personal preference. My clients, I've never had anybody sue me or come yelling and screaming back at me that I wasn't fair to them. Basically, because it's just, I find if you tell the truth and you try to just represent the boat for what it is rather than what you want it to be, then everybody ends up being.
Tilo, do you have some other questions?
Yeah, I've got a couple of other questions here, and the other questions have to do really. It's about what's the difference between the asking price and the real sale value?
That's pretty easy to determine if you have a knowledgeable broker. There's enough resources. There's a thing in Yacht World where you can't, but I can go in there and I can find out all the selling prices of every Super Marimo ever sold, that's been in Yacht World. And let's face it, Yacht World is the big kahuna. That's what basically you have to list a boat in Yacht World if you want to be in business. However, a lot of times brokers will fudge on those figures, believe it or not, because some brokers want to say they sold it for more, so that when a guy comes in their office and says, "I want to list my mail," well, look what I sold this one for, And some people make them quite a bit lower than what they really sold them for, so they can have people feel that they're not going to be able to get what they want for the boat, and it makes it easier to sell it for a price that's a little bit below the market. But if you're shrewd, if you take your time and do a little bit, when my customers come to me, I can give them a whole list of things and say, this is what these boats sold for. In addition, here's like 6 boats that I sold last year that didn't even make it into the MLS, and this is what they sold for. And some of these people won't mind. Here's their phone number, call them and ask them, what they sold their boat for and ask them how they were treated. But typically speaking, there is no set percentage difference between what the asking price is and what the selling price is. I think it's determined by how much homework was done before the boat was put on the market to decide what niche it really fit in. This boat should be in this spot because it needs to have the rigging replaced. The generator's got 6,000 hours on it and the sails are a little bit wobbly. Whereas, another one that doesn't have those deficiencies, is going to sell for more. But I would suggest that 10% is, on most of the boats I sell, that's within the limit, because I price boats to where they're attractive to people. When they look at the price, they can hopefully, say, that's pretty reasonable price if the boat's in as good a shape as he says it is. And then just make sure that when people get on the boat's in the kind of shape you represent it as being. But about 10%, I would say.
Okay. As a follow-up to that, Julius he asked, what's the negotiation strategy you would recommend to buyers to help them find the seller's bottom line?
Knowledge is power. I said that several times. Make sure you know what you're talking about as a buyer. Make sure you know a little bit more about Amels than than most people know about other boats when they're buying them, because their Amels are very specific in certain areas. We all know that they have certain things on them that you won't find anywhere else. So be knowledgeable about the boat. Do some homework in terms of what these boats typically sell for, so you make a realistic offer. I tell people all the time, don't go and make somebody angry with an offer. It never, ever helps. Basically try to get to where you think you want to end up, and he'll come to where he thinks you got to end up. And then I typically say at that point, if there's not I said, why don't you guys just split the difference? And basically that usually works if everybody's playing fair. But it's making a knowledgeable, strategic offer that you think, I want to end up here, so I'm going to make this offer. And maybe he'll just say, okay, I'll meet you in the middle. And that's where you want to be. Or maybe it'll come out $5,000, $10,000 higher or lower than what you expect. But all the people that I sell boats to, again, they tell me, this is my budget. I said, is that your budget for a boat all done? Or is that, and is that a boat, do you get the survey and all the other stuff done? You got to look at the big picture. And if they tell me that this is a budget they have, and their budget is not enough to buy an Amel that's going to be usable and not something that they're going to have to do triage on from the moment they buy it until they get rid of it, you have to tell them, you say, that's, I can't waste your time, showing you boats, because they're not going to take those offers for them. But, if somebody is close to realistic, you work within their budget, and hopefully, you can find them something that meets the requirements reasonably, and that they'll end up being happy with, and not have to do an incredible amount of work on it right off the bat.
Tilo, let me jump in just 1 minute. I want to try and clarify something for everybody. In terms of selling a boat or buying a boat, and all of the things that Joel offered, that applies whether it's in the United States, Europe, Thailand, Australia, Caribbean. But in terms of the paperwork, for instance, Joel Potter mentioned documentation clerk. Those are things that are really specific to the United States. Joel mentioned contract structure. Well, that's going to be different in different countries.
It is.
So Joel is giving you his perspective in those answers as an American broker. And it may be a little bit confusing if you're in Europe, where the broker normally handles the documentation. So please bear with us here. Joel's experience is in the United States, and he has a lot of experience in some of the things that he's pointed out that you need to do in preparing your boat, setting your expectations. All of those things, of course, apply worldwide. So I'm sorry, I needed to jump in and make that clarification, because
I would like to comment on that. I've sold a lot of boats in Europe. I've sold a lot of boats all over the world, and I've worked with a lot of different yacht brokers in Europe. And I've never known any broker in Europe that did all of the documentation work. They would gather up the paperwork and the things that were needed, and then they would present it to somebody who was the final authority to say, yeah, this is good, this is okay, this is straightforward and stuff like that. But I have experienced it slightly contrary to what you said, but basically the brokers pull the papers together and then they hand it to somebody else who finally gives it a stamp of approval, because I think legally a lot of brokerage firms, aren't covered to do that type of thing. Maybe a little bit more in Europe than over here, but over here, almost everybody uses a documentation agent. But I see your point.
Okay. I've got a question from Jillian, which is, at what point in the process can a buyer expect to be given access to documentation, provenance, and previous ownership details?
Good question. As much as the broker knows, I sold a boat that Bill knows quite well, because he did the school on it for a couple of people, at least 2 or 3 that owned the boat. And I'm happy to give people that type of information if I know, in terms of this family owned it and they did this and they did this and they did this. And I've got a lot of boats that I've sold it to everybody that ever owned it. And it makes people feel good to know what the history is. In terms of the the documentation to close the boat, at any time, you can get your documentation agent or you can yourself request from the Coast Guard the document that shows whether there's any liens or encumbrances on it. But I'll tell you that the Coast Guard is just like customs house brokers. They would rather deal with a custom house guy who does this for a living than brings in a stack of like 30 boats and they just go pop, 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 pop. Because they know he's not going to put his business on the line by putting anything in front of them that isn't correct. Where if somebody comes off their own boat, they got 10,000 questions. They don't want to deal with it. And the Coast Guard's the same way, particularly since COVID, because everybody's working out of their houses, and the specialists that deal in questionable or cases where something is not quite clear and they want to make sure it's clear before they make a ruling on it. Those guys aren't even showing up right now. It's just amazing. So if you buy a boat that has anything questionable on the paperwork, it might be a good idea to pay do you remember how much it costs to pull that form? About $100. It's about $100, I think, to have the Coast Guard get you the form that you need that tells you what the details are regarding ownership. And that would also, in most cases, go back to the original owner on the boat. Not in all cases, but in most cases, it would go back and it would let you know everybody who's owned it.
Okay, good. Now, Michael has a question. What percentage of boats do you sell that don't actually go out onto the open market websites such as Yacht World or things like that? How many of them go sort of in the private market?
It varies. It varies. A lot of times, if I had 10 Super Maramus today, I could sell 10 Super Maramus. Seriously, it's just the market. If you look at it, 2 years ago, there was like 76 of them on the market. The last time I looked, there was like 24 or something like that. So it depends. It's supply and demand. And basically, if I've got people that are waiting and they're hopping from one foot to the other, they of course they want to be the first ones to get to look at the boat. But generally speaking, if the owner wants me to put it on the market, I've had people that didn't want the boat to go into the multiple listing service, and for a number of reasons. They didn't want anybody to know that they were selling the boat for whatever reasons they might have. I've had non-disclosure agreements with people that didn't, they were either famous or one thing or another, and they didn't want anybody to know what was going on. They didn't want other people going on their boat unless I was with them. And I said, that's kind of unreasonable. But they said, well, you sold us the boat, we trust you, and we don't want anybody else to be on the boat. You just sell us for it. Here's the keys, send me the money. And that's a real good feeling when somebody trusts you that much, but it doesn't happen quite that often. But it varies in terms of what the supply and demand is, in terms of sometimes I sell a boat before I even write a listing on it. Really got somebody that just wants one right now. And when the boat shows up, they walk down and see it and it's gone. But if you can also get in touch with me and get on the list. So.
Okay. Good.
That's a horrible answer. I don't want to seem arrogant like that. Really don't, because it doesn't have anything to do with that. It has to do with, it's mainly supply and demand. If there's a lot of boats out there, things are a lot easier for buyers. But when the market tightens up the way it is recently, people have discovered it's nice to get on the water to get away from all this stuff. Except now you can't go anywhere. So.
Yeah, actually, that's a couple of questions have just popped up asking about how the COVID situation is affecting things.
But, that is such a hard thing because everything changes so often, in terms of what people are allowing. There's the Bahamas are opening up again, the Caribbean's opening up again. But I had a boat stuck in Panama for 6 months. We couldn't get on it to show it. I had people that really wanted that boat, and it was hard because the owner couldn't get any crew into the country. He could come as the owner of the boat and get on it and leave, but it was basically, he had to, quarantine for a couple of days, buy his groceries and leave. There wasn't any, hanging around and getting things fixed, stuff like that. So it was a very difficult circumstance, but it has affected the way people are evolving their plans. Let's face it, most cruisers, they think they're going to do this, this, and this, and this. And if everybody looks at what really happened in their life after they bought a boat, went cruising, it evolves. You go to places and then your ideas change, and you hear from some people, this place is nicer than that. But now it's getting, in terms of what's open and what isn't. And it's, if you got some friends that are out there that have a blog, you know, sometimes they can go and sometimes they can't. And sometimes they get, you know, caught in places where it's extremely expensive. And I'm glad that they saved a lot of money, because living in Tahiti for 6 months is a hell of a lot more expensive than living in St. Thomas for 6 months. You just got to check. You just got to check and see what's going on, because it evolves an awful lot.
Well, it's also the question of you know, what is happening to boat prices and the supply and demand. As you pointed out, there are very few Super Maramus out on the market. Are people looking for, you know, getting boats now as their isolation method? They
are. You know, a lot of people. I mean, I live in the Central Florida, and we got lakes all over the place, and nobody has any inventory for bass boats, pontoon boats, fishing boats, because people have realized they can go out in their boat and have their own little private Idaho, as it were, and get away from everybody, and you know, not have to worry about getting sick and things like that. I'm not kidding you. I have a little 6 horsepower kicker, and I said, "Hey, I need a rear seal on the end of the prop shaft seal. When can I bring it in?" And they said, "June." And it's that way all the way up the line, you know, from the market's tightened up, prices have tightened up a little bit. They haven't really increased. It's just, there's not as much wiggle room, you know, from what the thing is listed at in terms of what it sells for. But, you know, nothing stays the same. And as we come out of this, you know, things, you just have to read the tea leaves and see what's going on out there. And then you can make some determinations based on the influencing things that have an influence on what boats sell for and whether people are buying them or not. Right now, it's a tight market.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Courtney had a question. Is there an advantage to the seller to list with you right off the bat instead of listing on the Amel site first? And I'm not sure if that means on the users group or listing it directly with Amel.
Well, I think it probably met on the Amel Yacht Owners group. I think that's the Courtney that I'm thinking of. It's a matter of personal preference. Some people, when they want to sell their boat, they want a professional that just takes the boat, takes care of everything, sends them a check when it's done. They don't want to have to do all that stuff. And some people, you know, think, "Oh, I can sell my boat myself." No, you can't. You know, some people shouldn't, you know, they don't know how to sell stuff, and they make people mad the way they represent things. Most people are, you know, if you have amount of money to buy an Amel, you're pretty well-rounded and well-reasoned, and you can talk correctly to people, and you know what to say and what to do. And if you can sell the boat yourself, I've helped people, you know, sell their boat themselves, and they say, "What do I do?" And I just tell them, "Well, this is what you do." And they run into a problem. You know, I'm not greedy, but you know, it's a matter of personal preference. If you want to try it on your own, you know, if you can answer the phone and answer some questions about your boat and go and show it to people, that's a possibility. On the other hand, a lot of people just want to be sure, you know, that I'm done cruising and I'm going to go back and hang out with my grandchildren or whatever it is they're going to do. They just want somebody professional to take care of the boat, and they don't have to worry about anything bad happening. You know, they just want to hear that, okay, I showed your boat today, we're sea trialing it next week, and we should close by the end of the month. That's what they like to hear. But if you want to try it yourself, I'd say the Amel Yacht Owners Group would be a good place to do it, or any other, you know, there's a whole bunch of services that cater to that type of thing. So it's just, okay. I think it's personal preference. Great.
I've got 2 more questions here, and then we've got to wind it down. One from Brian is if a U.S. citizen purchases a VAT paid, an EU VAT paid vessel, what is involved with maintaining that EU VAT paid status?
If you're not a citizen of the European Union, you can't maintain it. Now, let me just qualify that. That's the way it was when I checked on it about 6 months ago. But this is a moving target. It changes as you know. Look at all the people in England, you know, since the Brexit. You know, there's almost punitive moves that are being made against them in terms of what they can do in the EU and what they can't. And I don't follow all of that because I don't get a lot of European clients. I used to back in the day when when the dollar was real weak, they'd come rushing over here. And when it was the other way, we'd rush over there. I lived in Spain for about 3 months once because the market was so strong and the dollar was so powerful that, you know, it was a lot of fun. Those are great days. But yeah, you just got to watch what happens with the market.
Okay, great. And one is I think a bit more, the last question is more a bit of a philosophical question, I would say it, from Dimitris. And I think it's what we've all seen is that there has been a shift in Amel's production, you know, from, you know, the Super Maramu, the 54. And how do you see the future of Amel? Because, you know, the newer boats are at they're more oriented towards the demands of the market, and they don't really seem to have quite the same Amel heritage.
I call it Amel DNA, and probably people who are watching this don't know this, but when I went to work for Amel, they were very hesitant to have an outside broker because they said brokers are selfish, brokers don't know the product, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, they spend a lot of money on me every year to bring me over there and to teach me about the building processes and stuff like that. And Amels are built every bit as well, if not better than they used to be. They really are. There's just a different flavor. There's a different direction. They're not quite as centrally focused on extreme offshore passage making. They're, you know, they look like everything else that's on the market in a lot of ways. They all have a plumb bow and this, that, and the other thing, because it's fashion. And the Captain Amel was blind, and he didn't really give a darn about fashion. It was form follows function. That's the thing that really lit me up. I remember the first time I went on an Amel boat. I mean, I was gobsmacked. I just thought, I never saw anything that was so close to, it was a Euros, and I sold it like 3 days later. It was just amazing. Anyway, I think Amel will sell every boat they build as long as they keep their quality up. And I hope they do, because although most of my compadres are retired or worse, they build a really good product. They found a niche in the market. They're selling everything that they're building right now, and they've got a backlog. But there's, you know, whether it's right or it's wrong, or whether I like it or whether I don't, there's a different flavor. There's a different attitude with the boat in terms of the direction they're going. And the boats are a lot more opulent. They're a lot more sexy. And I still miss the bobber water tank meter, you know, from having a water tank in the keel and a couple of other things. But, you know, I was on the 50 at the Annapolis Boat Show with my good friend Antoine Riaton, and I liked the boat. It was pretty. I mean, it was really, and the construction quality was probably every bit as good, if not even a little bit better, because I use a lot more vacuum bagging and more structural fiberglass elements than they used to in the old days. So I think that they're good boats. They're just a little bit different, and I'm not so sure that that's going to make a big difference, because I'm selling Amel's 53s and older boats to younger people. It's usually the younger people that want the newest, latest, greatest. They don't want, something that looks, 15 years old. But, I'm selling to young families, and they're 35, 40, stuff like that. I'm selling Super Maramus, and they could afford to buy pretty much whatever they wanted, but they liked the features of the Super Maramu that were more aimed towards serious offshore passage making, living aboard, stuff like that. Then maybe the new stuff is slightly, but they're not bad boats, and they do a good job at cruising, and they are quite handsome, and they're very well built. There's a different focus since Captain Amel's been gone.
Okay, thanks, Joel. For everybody, next month, possibly, I'll set the date later. I can't set it today, but I think we're going to have a live video tour of an Amel 60. It's what we're working on. We've got a lot of things to coordinate, and as soon as I get the information, I'll broadcast it out on the group. I'm probably not going to be able to broadcast it well in advance. I think every meeting so far we've broadcast to let everybody know at least a month in advance. This may be a week in advance. at best. So I'll let you know. Thanks again, everybody, for joining. As you know, this has also been recorded, and you can view it later on our YouTube channel. Thanks.
Great, thanks a lot.
Bill, Joe, Tito, thanks so much, guys. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Tilo. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank
Thank
you.
you, Bill.
Welcome.
Thank you, Pete.
Thank you, Joel. Nice to meet you.
Great, yeah, good to see you. Good to see everybody.
Yeah.
you.
Okay. I guess we're gonna bail out. Have a good evening.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks a lot, Joel. Thank you, Vila.